Good evening. All right. I had mentioned last week that we would do a couple of weeks between books of doing some topical stuff, and right into my lap drops the peace plan yesterday. It was it was released. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to even skim some of what this is supposed to encompass. Anybody? Has anybody heard any commentary on it? Okay. I only took the first part. It's a part A and a part B. It's 181 pages. I've got part A here, and it probably will take us not just tonight, but more than likely next week too. It is going to be really interesting to watch what happens in the next 6 months with this. How many of you are familiar with all the different times that they've tried to do something to bring peace to the, quote, Israeli-Palestinian problem, and how many times they have introduced some kind of a land for peace plan? Anybody familiar with all the different ones? Okay. When you look at the details, they have always been this way. They are all written by politicians. You can tell by the way that there's political solutions to all of it, and as soon as you try to bring a political solution, you know it's just doomed. This is a business proposal. I'm telling you, this is a business proposal, and it is fascinating. And does it have any chance? No. But what I do really believe that someday, when it finally does happen, it will have much more of this kind of a look to it. Now, why do I believe that there will be a peace plan to begin with? Because here's what's going to happen. All of the prophecy people are going to come out of the woodworks, and they'll have something to say on it, kind of like, what we'll be doing here tonight. But you're always going to have that group of people that are going to say, okay, the tribulation starts tomorrow, right? So everybody's going to have that really knee-jerk reaction to the whole thing. And don't be worried about that. That's, there's no sense in doing it. But it's based on a very, very interesting passage, and it's found in Daniel chapter 9. So turn there, and we'll start there tonight. Now, I have a few slides that I kind of want to go through with you if I could, and to get us a little bit of an update of how we got to this place. And then there are some, in the first part of part A of this, there are some maps that are published. And in those maps, it shows what will happen for what would be, in this proposal, what's going to be for Israeli territory and for, quote, Palestinian. Now, let me stipulate to a few things. I'm going to call them Palestinians, but that's like saying that you believe in unicorns, all right? They don't exist. It's just a way of identifying people, but there's never been a nation of Palestine. In fact, if this ever saw the light of day, this would be the first time that there has ever been a, quote, Palestinian country with a Palestinian government or any of those things. It's never existed. It is a fabricated, made-up name for a made-up bunch of people, all right? The other thing that you're going to hear me, please just understand, I'm going to say this because this is how you're going to hear it discussed. People get all uptight. Is that the PowerPoint up? That's the first one? Good. There are people who get themselves just twisted up whenever you call the... Yes, it's working. This here, whenever you hear people refer to the West Bank, they want to call that Judea and Samaria. Great. That's what it's always been known in biblical times. But nobody's going to refer to it as Judea and Samaria when they're debating this over these coming months. They're going to call it the West Bank. So if you're not familiar with the territory, that's the West Bank. That is Gaza. All right? So for ease of use, I'm going to refer to them as Palestinians, so everybody just don't get mad at me for doing it, and don't try to correct me on the idea that there's no such thing as a Palestinian. Okay, great, fine. And it's Judea, Samaria, it's not the West Bank. Agreed, not a problem. But it's just a lot easier because I'm going to use the terms that they use for ease of use and understanding. Are we good with that? Okay, because if not, the hate mail goes to Bob and... All right, so if you want to see this, and if you want to look at it in more detail, again, this is, like I say, this is part A, and it's probably 60 or so pages of it. it has in Part B what all the investment is going to be. And so it explains who should be paying for what, why this is so different. And if I don't get to it right away, let me just lay out a couple of things, and then we'll look at the Daniel passage. But what this looks to do that is unprecedented, and let me just go ahead and give you what I believe is my summary of this whole thing. And it's simply this. Look, everybody's tried this as long as anybody can remember. But it's always been tried in the way of trying to do a political solution to divide the country and nothing else. In this case, he says, we want Egypt and we want Jordan to have a major, major role in this. And there's going to be a flood of money that comes in, and it's going to try to normalize relationships with Israel and the surrounding countries. Now, if Jordan and Egypt start to reap the benefit, guess who's right on the border of those two places? The West Bank and Gaza. And it is also a way of saying, look, other than the nutcases in Iran, the rest of you are somewhat, quote, moderate of the surrounding nations. Cast off the crazy stuff and let everybody get involved in trying to bring some kind of prosperity to this area, and the political stuff will take care of itself. So it's trying to do it in total reverse order than anything that's been attempted before, and that's why it's so intriguing to me. And so when you take a look at the maps and what they're proposing to do in Israel, it's an interesting thing that's being proposed. Now, for all of the alarmists and the people that you'll probably see running around in circles with their hair on fire over the next few months, it is because they'll say, Trump's the Antichrist, because this is the thing that starts the whole, this is going to be it. And I'll just basically say this, whether it's Trump or Kushner or anybody else that did this, to me they are not Antichrist material, because that guy won't be quite as clumsy. And people are going to come to that guy and gather around him like we've not seen before. And if you haven't noticed anything about the president, though, he's been a pleasant surprise to me. He's not a really much of a galvanizing kind of a person, right? If you like him, you like him. If you don't, you want to throw rocks at him, right? All right. So everybody also that's involved with him is the same thing. Now, the same objections that they've always had anytime that this has been attempted are going to be the same ones that you'll see this time. Basically, what this proposal is looking to do is to say to Hamas and to the Palestinian Authority, look, if you guys don't like it, you don't have to get on board. We'll just run you over. Kind of interesting. It's a way of marginalizing these guys and basically saying, the reason you don't like this is because once it happens, you won't be needed anymore because you won't have a bunch of victims left. That's the way that this thing's written. When you read between the lines and try to get the big picture and say, why does this thing look so different? You'll see. And so I've excerpted a lot of it. In fact, if I look like I'm kind of deranged a little bit, it's because I've been reading through this ever since I printed it yesterday. And so I've got all 50 or so pages that I've gone through. There's just no way to get through it tonight, but I'd like to walk through it kind of carefully with you, mainly because whatever comes eventually, I think it'll have a lot more of this kind of stuff than all the stuff that's been done since Oslo and all the additions to the Oslo Accords, all right? But I want to go through a little bit of the history that's got us to this point, just in some images up here. And we'll start with Daniel chapter 9. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you as we're here this evening. We get a chance to look through things that are important in this part of the world and what's going on over there. Our involvement in that is intriguing as well. And what takes place there. We ask, Lord, that you would give us eyes to see these things and that we would be discerning as we read through and hear these things discussed. What will be taking place as time goes by, we ask, Lord, that you would help us to see with one eye what we see on the text, and then the other eye looking towards the future of things, realizing that everything culminates in that part of the world. And we ask, Lord, that you would help us in our understanding tonight. We give you thanks. We give you all praise in Jesus' name. Amen? So, here's why when this stuff starts to get discussed, people begin to get a little antsy and nervous. Okay? Happens every time. There is a verse, it's found in verse 27, And let's remember that this Daniel chapter 9, starting at verse 25, is where you start to get the metrics of where Jesus would be the one who comes in at Jerusalem. This is the triumphal entry, and then he's cut off. And there's still 7 years left in this prophecy that Daniel has. The first part of it, all the rest of it has been fulfilled from the time that Artaxerxes said, rebuild the wall, until the time that Jesus came into Jerusalem. That took care of the first 69 weeks. What you have left is the 70th week, and it has not yet happened. So you get all of the mechanics of it, the mathematics of it are in the first part in verse 25 and then verse 26. What you get is the 70th week, the last 7 years. And here's what you get in verse 27. Then he, this is the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That's 7 years. That's what we would know as the tribulation. Now, something gets him, this covenant that he makes, just seems to put him in a place where he has access to that part of the world that really no one has had to this point. So much so that they start to follow after him. Read Revelation 13, and you get a good idea that that guy in a very short amount of time has worldwide following, and he ultimately becomes a world dictator. So it happens very, very quickly. What we're reading here, this is something that they expect to take decades to fully implement. And it will take a long, long time to get all of the infrastructure. What they're talking about doing, when I get to the map, they're talking about being able to build underground subway kind of transportation from Gaza, from here over into this area, which links the two areas. So that, just so you know, that doesn't happen overnight, does it? That takes a lot of investment and a lot of maneuvering and work and everything else to make that happen. But what he wants to do is keep the existing areas, for the most part, cut little swaths through it so you have ways to get through. But he wants to connect these two and build along here to extend Gaza. This is what's being proposed. And I keep saying he. It's his administration, the people that put it together. Trump is just the face of it because he's the president. But there are a lot of people who have put this together, and they're basically saying, let's make this a business deal. Let's not make it a political deal. Let's make it a business deal, and everything will follow. So verse 27, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of that week, he'll bring an end to the sacrifices. So part of this covenant is going to really reestablish the idea of temple worship and all the things that will take place. He'll end up going in and defiling the temple all over again, like the last time that it was done with a guy named Antiochus. Before Jesus was born, that was done. So there is this idea that every time that you see something like this, people think that this kind of an agreement and a two-state solution and all the rest of that is the beginning of this covenant. That's what they, the two things are put together. And it's a very plausible reason. It's a very plausible idea. Now, with all of that said, when you start to look through the little bits and pieces of this, it gets really, really interesting. The first part of this is going to deal with the political stuff, and it's going to say a lot of the same kind of things that we're used to hearing. But when you start to see other little bits and pieces that are mentioned here, it's when you realize, oh, they're doing something different. What he is doing here is he's using a stick to basically say, you guys haven't done the right thing all along. So what we're going to do is make it where everybody will prosper, and if you've got the ones who want to keep fighting the battles the way that they have, they're all going to continue in their misery while everybody else is doing really well. And they're thinking that will put the external pressure on the leadership to kind of get on board, right? So let's go through a couple of these really quick. This is a modern picture of Israel. And it has, kind of the surrounding areas, but it's color-coded, which makes it really easy to understand. What you have here and here, what's known as Gaza and the West Bank, you're going to hear it mentioned, that's basically what happened after the 67 war. Israel was attacked. Those were not areas that Israel had control over. And in the fight of that, they got way down into here. Israel took all of this, too, and gave it back to Egypt. But they kept Gaza because they didn't want that much of an intrusion of Egypt up into Israel. This was taken from Jordan because they didn't want Jordan to have their ability to get right up to the doorstep of Jerusalem. So they took this, everything from Jordan River over to here, they took it all back from Jordan. And the reason is, let me see if I have it on the next one. All right, this doesn't want to advance for me. Okay. This is what was agreed to in 47. And really what kind of was in operation from 48, Israel agreed to it and a war broke out in 48. So in 48, they ended up getting what you see here for the most part. And you'll notice that this is very similar to what was pre-67. They pretty much got that. Same thing with Gaza. But notice this around here. That was also part of what was two states. What you're going to find with what is being proposed in this is to reestablish that part again. And they're going to divide up a little bit of this. More of it will be in Israel's hands. But this was Israel back in 47, the proposal. So it was about a half and half nation as far as land. And basically, by the time you get below Beersheba, down into here, there's not much. It's just open area. It's just desert. There's not much down there. So really the heart of what you've got is everything from here up to here and then back up in this area. The rest of it is pretty open area. So this was 47. Now you get to, there we go, now you get to 67, and that is what happened after that war. So this is what Israel currently has. Now, since it's been about 15 years since they did it, but Israel removed every Jew out of Gaza, and what you have left here, that is where you have Hamas that runs the Gaza Strip. There are no Jews in there. They were all forcibly removed. That is run by terrorists, straight up. And here's what's amazing. They say that without any attempt to try to soft sell it. They just basically say, look, this is just the straight up truth. Gaza's run by terrorists, and as long as it's run by terrorists, it's going to be a disaster. They just say it straight out. Finally, somebody is saying what's obvious. Now, in this area here, what you have is that Israel has had some settlements within that area ever since 67 and even prior. And it's a place of real contention. So the West Bank more than Gaza because it's a much larger landmass. Now, there are people that are very upset with this because they're going to say, well, this divides up the land. And it does. And there are some people that are reporting that it divides up Jerusalem, which it does not. It does give a portion of East Jerusalem that really is already kind of more in Palestinian hands because Jews don't really go there much. And so it's not going to be like they're going to divide the old city in half and give half to the Palestinians and half to the Jews. The Jews basically hold all the cards in this. Now, it has already been it has been rejected by all of the likely suspects. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Authority, Iran, all the people you would expect to say, no, it's never going to happen. This is pretty much saying, we're done talking to you. If you don't want to be involved, that's fine. We're going to start working around you and let your people see that they could have a better life, and they're going to put the pressure on you. And it's a way of trying to marginalize massively the groups like Hezbollah up in Lebanon and Iran, who is kind of, they're the ones who fund all of this stuff. It's an interesting thing that's here. So, under background, this is in the introduction part of it, and this is section 1, background. It says, the time has come to end the conflict and unlock the vast human potential and economic opportunity that peace will bring to Israelis, Palestinians, and to the region as a whole. Just that sentence tells you that they're putting the politics aside because really the PA didn't have much of any input in this. Most of the time when they try to put together some kind of a solution, they're going to have all of the people who can't stand being in the room with one another all have a seat at the table. They've bypassed those guys altogether. This is put together with basically business concerns, and Israel has been involved in this to some extent too. And really what you're going to find that Israel kind of has the veto power in a lot of this stuff. But in order to have that kind of power, they're going to have to give up a lot of land. Now, It says, now many Palestinians desire peace and they recognize the enormous economic opportunities and social benefits that await them if relations with the state of Israel can be normalized. Gaza is a very complicated situation. It is under the control of Hamas, a terrorist organization, and as a result of Hamas policies, it is approaching a humanitarian crisis. It is time to help the Palestinians achieve a hopeful and prosperous future to enable them to join the community of nations. Do you notice that they're not getting into any of the land? They're not getting into any of the politics of this at all. They keep coming back to that. The people are impoverished because they're run by bad guys. And this is intended to fix their problem and their plight. You're going to notice that that is what is being proposed here like I've never seen it before. Now, the absence of formal relations between Israel and most Muslim and Arab countries has only exacerbated the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. We believe that if more Muslim and Arab countries normalize relations with Israel, it will help advance a just and fair resolution to the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And it will prevent radicals from using this conflict to destabilize the region. Now, if you follow this over the years, that is astounding because they are trying to get the surrounding countries involved at the front end of this. And in doing so, it ends up taking out basically the leadership. This would be under what is called the Palestinian Authority or the old PLO. Everybody remember Yasser Arafat? Okay, when he, kicked off, the guy that they got after him is a guy named Mahmoud Abbas. Of course, he's flipping out over this whole thing, but basically, Mahmoud Abbas, I know this would get me in trouble depending on where I said it. Mahmoud Abbas is the, quote, Palestinian version of Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. He really is, and I say that just so that we have an understanding, because they will always point to something that has some element, if sometimes no element at all of truth, but they advocate for something and try to perpetuate it because as long as they do, they'll get a paycheck. That's the same with Mahmoud Abbas right here. Same thing. He's a terrorist in a business suit. But he's a whole lot different than these guys down here in Gaza because Hamas is a straight-up terrorist organization. Now, if you go to the charters of both, and they have a charter, their charters call for the removal of the nation of Israel by violence, and they don't even try to make any bones about it. They are there for the liberation of the land, which means exterminating every Jew if they don't leave voluntarily. They both have that, and they've never changed it. But in this, what you notice, again, the absence of formal relations between Israel and most of the Muslim Arab countries doesn't exist. They're calling for the normalization like Egypt has done and like Jordan. This is going to involve Egypt and Jordan as partners in this like no one has ever attempted to do before. And in doing so, it's going to show that Egypt and Jordan have had this in place with them for years anyway. Egypt, 40 years, and Jordan's another 25? They've been normalized with them forever. Now they're going to see a lot of financial, an infusion of capital come into those countries, which would put more pressure on the other ones. The other surrounding nations and the Muslim countries that are in that part of the region. So even Saudi Arabia is beginning to kind of soften towards this idea, though it hasn't got its act together and it still does its crazy human rights problems. But it's interesting because Iran is such a problem, they're getting people to listen. Now, when it comes up to the idea of Oslo, the Oslo Accords, however, it left numerous key issues unresolved pending the completion of permanent status negotiations. And this includes these problems: border security, refugees, and Jerusalem. These agreements did not create an effective path for neutralizing the kinds of crisis that emerged during the implementation of Oslo. Including waves of terror violence, many intelligent and dedicated people have devoted lifetimes in search of a, quote, ultimate deal, but what is required is a comprehensive agreement. I hate the word comprehensive. I'm so sick and tired of it. What you end up hearing most of the time when it's, we've got to have comprehensive this, that, or the other thing, just think cha-ching. because they don't try to fix any particular problem. They take some big, huge, massive law that doesn't work and they want to replace it with a, quote, comprehensive solution with just a bigger law that's going to make it worse than it was before. But these guys, when they're talking about comprehensive, means we've got to take care of the political, we have to take care of the financial, we got to take care of the religious, we got to take care of the land. All of those things need to be addressed all at the same time, but the priorities are going to be totally different. Just tell me if you track with this. When you usually hear this talked about, isn't it always, first and foremost, land for peace? Would you agree with that? That's always the first thing. Now it is this. We got to get people out of their poverty because that creates the problems. So we propose to get rid of the bad guys who don't ever want to agree to anything. Let's make the people prosper, and in order to do it, we've got to connect the areas. But Jews need to be able to live where Jews want to live. Palestinians need to live where they want to live, and they can join either group if they want to. It's going to be an open citizenship kind of a thing. If you're living in a Jewish area, but you're a Palestinian, you have the choice to stay a Palestinian, but you won't have a voice where you're living. But you can become Israeli. You can become a Jewish citizen, an Israeli citizen. Not a Jew, but an Israeli citizen. I'm telling you, I never imagined I'd see something like this. But it has the idea that something like this could be the ultimate thing that somebody comes in and says, that was a good start, let's get it the rest of the way there. The Daniel 9:27 thing. So this ultimate deal is what is required. It's a comprehensive agreement that has been elusive, and waves of terror and violence have set back the progress significantly. Only a comprehensive agreement, coupled with a strong economic plan for Palestinians and others, has the capacity to bring lasting peace and to all parties. Now, what they've been able to do traditionally over the years, as soon as they look like they're starting to get somewhere, they'll have terrorist attacks and it shoots everything down. Or the other poison pill in it is that with Hamas and with the Palestinian Authority, you've got to recognize Israel as a nation, and you've got to swear off on terrorism. They refuse to do it, and they know that from the beginning. When they draft these things up, they know it's never going to happen. So they can go back home and tell everybody, well, we tried, but they just won't do it. This is looking to get around those guys. Kind of interesting. So the vision addresses today's realities, and it provides the Palestinians who do not yet have a state with a path to dignified national life, respect, security, and economic opportunity, and at the same time, it safeguards Israel's security. Now, that's going to assume a lot of things. Before I go on any further, here's the reality of it. Every time that something like this is attempted, it attempts to take care of all of the external things. It says that Muslims and Christians and Jews can live side by side and get along with one another. And you'll find a lot of evidence for that. It becomes a problem when you have what some would call radicalized Muslims in particular. I would probably refer to them more as fundamental. They're going by the absolute tenets of what you are seeing taught in the Hadiths and in the Quran. And they're whipped up by the people, the imams and whatnot, that take those warlike passages from the Quran and the Hadiths and tell people it is their duty to rid the world of the Israeli occupation of Muslim lands. You're never going to get rid of that. What they're looking to do is to make sure that you do as much as you can to marginalize the radicals and not to overreact when they start to do the things that they do. Now they're going to try to find a way, thinking that they can do it in a financial sense, to give them an incentive not to go back to the same old, same old. That's the calculus here. That's what they think that they're going to be able to do. What it fails to recognize is the spiritual problem behind this whole thing. Muslims hate Jews, and the hatred of the Jews is because they're God's people. They probably don't even fully understand why they hate them. It is a spiritual dynamic that is at play here, and that's why there is such an issue with this. Again, there's no other good explanation as to why the nations and the world in particular has such a problem with Israel. If you try to figure it out, why do they hate them so bad? You come back, as a Christian, you will come back with only one answer. It has to have a spiritual explanation. There's no other alternative to it. Now, I want to do a couple more of these. Let me see if I can get this to advance for me. Okay, it does. Now, it's a little tough to see. There are two of these, and you guys, you can get this on the internet. You can pull your own copy of it, okay? It's called, if you just put this up and you say Peace to Prosperity, that is the name of the of what I'm reading from tonight, and you can go read it for yourself. Remember, I'm excerpting this. I'm not reading it paragraph by paragraph. I'm highlighting things. Now, you'll notice in this one, this shows what Israel is. And you'll see that the maps change a little bit. This shows the places in what is called the West Bank. Notice how it's changed a little bit. You notice how the West Bank looks a little bit different? It has dots in places. Let me see if I can go back one. Okay, yeah. See how this is kind of an uninterrupted deal? Now look. You see the dots and all the rest of that? That is inside the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, where there is enough of a Jewish influence that they would not want to have them removed. So there is going to be ways to get in and out of that would be around. Here is what we're looking at, just so you understand. This blue, that would be the state, the nation of Palestine. Okay? That's the state, the sovereign nation of Palestine, run by the Palestinian government. That's the first time in human history it would ever see the light of day. But this is the proposal. So what you'll notice if you were to look here, if you could see it, you can go ahead and look at it online, but if you were to see it, these are the names of the various places, and they're within those areas. Notice there's none of them in Gaza. But you're going to see in the next one, this is the nation of Israel, and this is the nation of, quote, Palestine. So it has those little spots there that tell you those are the places that are being mentioned. These are what they call enclave communities, and enclaves are where in a particular area you're going to have people who live within the West Bank who are Jewish. They're called enclaves, and they'll explain how they're going to deal with those residents. Rather than forcibly remove them out of the area, they're going to be allowed to stay, and they can take on Jewish or Palestinian, title. Now, here's what's interesting. Notice this. Notice that there's building all along here, and notice the little line that's between them. That's now going to be Gaza under this proposal. So they would get this land, not just Gaza, but they would get this and this, and that is the underground kind of subway that would go, that would bring all the commerce between the two places. It connects Gaza to what is the West Bank, or the other part of what would be the nation of Palestine. And so it runs all up and through here. But notice that there's this big incursion here. That goes all the way to Jerusalem. So there's a main road that takes you from west to east. And it really brings all of the port things that you have, Ashdod and places like that, and all the way up in the north at Haifa. You've got to get that stuff to Jerusalem. Remember, this here, these ports, are all at sea level. But Jerusalem's over 2,000 feet up. So you've got that incline, and that's how you bring it up to Jerusalem, is on this main road that comes in from the coast. So when we're there, we travel on all of these roads. What you're looking at is the proposal for this. And it's kind of interesting when you look at the actual pictures themselves on a larger scale, and you can actually read all the little bits and pieces. What you have here, and you look at them back to back, these are the two nations that are shown there by their geography and what they're proposing for it to be. Really an interesting thing, because it's far and away the most, if I can use their word, it's the most comprehensive thing I've ever seen, because it really puts together borders, but then it starts to show how they're going to build the infrastructure that makes it work. That's pretty interesting. They're doing this all at the front end, where it used to be, let's get them to agree to something, and then we'll start to work on the details. This, like I said, when I said at the beginning, it's put together like a business plan. You see it? This is like, here's what's in it for you guys to come to the table and do it. It's not just land, but it's land with prosperity and with building and with this and with that. And it's going to require Egypt and Jordan to have a big seat at the table. Really interesting. All right. Now, the two-state solution is a section in here. It says, the vision addresses today's realities and provides the Palestinians who have not yet had a state with a path to a dignified national life, respect, security, and economic opportunity, and at the same time, it safeguards Israel's security. A realistic solution would give the Palestinians all the power to govern themselves, but not the powers to threaten Israel. And here's where it's going to get very interesting. This necessarily entails the limitations of certain sovereign powers in the Palestinian areas, such as maintenance of Israel's security responsibility and Israel control of the airspace above the Jordan River. So what this basically says is we're going to give you your state, but it's going to be done on this contingency. You've got to keep it together. And it won't be done right away. Israel has the right to go and do whatever it's going to do, but try to do it as least provocatively as possible. You're going to find that they're going to get to the point of they can fly blimps and drones and everything else to watch things so that there's not boots on the ground kind of a thing. But Israel has the right to monitor you guys. That's going to be one of the big objections. Today, that concept seems so far from reality. Gaza and the West Bank are politically divided. Gaza is run by Hamas, a terrorist organization that has fired thousands of rockets at Israel and murdered hundreds of Israelis. In the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority is plagued by failed institutions and endemic corruption. Its laws incentivize terrorism, and the Palestinian Authority-controlled media and schools promote a culture of incitement. We've never talked like this as a country. This is basically stating the blatantly obvious. Are you catching this? We never say this obvious stuff, but the fact that it's now being said openly is really remarkable, at least for me anyway. When I was reading this, I was like, that's bold. They never talk about this stuff. Look at what else. Basically, you just heard this. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and the Palestinian Authority is so corrupt it's teaching its kids the Jews live on the blood of Palestinians like vampires. That's the kind of stuff. Pull down the maps that they have in their rooms. There is no Israel on their maps. So it creates the problem. So it says, it is because of the lack of accountability and bad governance that billions of dollars have been squandered in investment that are unable to flow into those areas to allow the Palestinians to thrive. Add to it the fools around the world that are doing the BDS movement. Okay, so the boycott, divest, and sanction. One of the places that's in the West Bank recently, you guys probably saw this, like within the last 3 years or so. But anybody here own a SodaStream? Nobody in here has a SodaStream machine? They're awesome. Do you like carbonated things, but maybe not all the sugary things? I love carbonated drinks. I've got a SodaStream. I can turn water into carbonated water and add a little bit of not seasoning. That's what you put on food. I can add like a little flavor thing, and I could put like lemon or lime or something else like that. I have carbonated water with a flavor to it. Cool. It's an Israeli company. Used to have a big plant in the West Bank, and the BDS movement was putting so much pressure on it. Finally, they said, "Done. We're moving it onto the mainland." And they moved it closer to the Mediterranean. And now all the people that got jobs for SodaStream in Israel are really happy. You know the ones that got hurt? The people in the West Bank who had the best jobs in the area from an Israeli company. So this BDS movement that you hear about is such garbage, and it hurts people. So the Palestinians deserve a better future and a vision that can help them to achieve that future. Palestinian leaders must embrace peace by recognizing Israel as the Jewish state, rejecting terrorism in all of its forms, allowing for special arrangements that addresses Israel and the region's vital security needs, building effective institutions, and choosing pragmatic solutions. Now, this is, again, pragmatism. It's like, you can do this or you can do that. The wise thing to do, the pragmatic thing to do, would be to say, yeah, we may not like them and everything else, but what's happening now is not working. They're hoping that getting to these things aren't working, and now we can get it where the world works for the rest of us, will make it where you'll start to like those people a bit more. That's what the thought behind this appears to be. So it says, now, if these steps are taken and the criteria set forth in this vision are satisfied, then the United States will support the establishment of a Palestinian state. So we have a big stake in this. Now, what's really fascinating about this is I start to get a little bit nervous when I hear those kind of things because we have such a big part of this. And anything that works to the detriment of the Jewish people puts that nation on the radar as far as God is concerned. That goes back to the Genesis 12 thing. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. So if we do something that works to the detriment of Israel, God help us. So, this vision is security focused, and it provides both self-determination and significant economic opportunities for the Palestinians. We believe that this design will enable a vision to be successfully implemented. This vision also provides positive benefits to the Kingdom of Jordan and to the Republic of Egypt and to countries throughout the region. They keep reiterating that, and you see it's kind of woven all throughout this agreement. When it says that there's a whole section, opportunities for regional cooperation. This is a new approach. Listen to this. The Middle East has gone through enough dramatic shifts since the beginning of this conflict. In confronting common threats and in pursuing common interests, previously unimaginable opportunities and alliances are emerging. The threats posed by Iran's radical regime, for example, have led to a new reality where the State of Israel and its Arab neighbors now share an increasingly similar perception of the threats to their security. Do you catch that? This is the Trump administration trying to parlay what the crazy things that Iran is doing is really freaking out the people in the neighborhood. Why is that? Because for the most part, most of the nations in the area are Sunni Muslims. The Iranians are Shiite Muslims and crazy radicalized, doing all kinds of insane things. And the nations around them are really pretty worried about what's happening in Iran and the things that it's doing. Saudi Arabia at the top of that. Everybody else is not quite as vocal, but everybody's worried about Iran, especially if they become nuclear. The Trump administration wants to exploit that fear, and they're looking to do it. Right here it is in writing. Again, if you're familiar with all the dynamics of this and you start to read it, you go, oh my gosh, they said that? Because you might read through this and that's no big deal. When you start to single out the idea that the Iranians are really becoming a problem for all of the surrounding nations, and they're going to say this openly and say, what do we do to marginalize them further? Turn the Arab world against them, vocally, financially. Interesting. So, if peace can be achieved, the economic and security cooperation between the State of Israel and Arab neighbors can create a prosperous Middle East that is connected by a common desire for security and economic opportunity. If implemented, this vision can lead to direct flights between the State of Israel and its neighbors. That doesn't happen right now. The transport of people and commerce and unlocking of opportunities for millions of people to visit religious sites sacred to their faiths. These are the carrots that are being dangled. Having regular commercial abilities to go from place to place. In this vision, it says this: we developed a detailed economic vision for what the future of the Palestinians could be if there were peace. There has been a false notion that the lack of opportunity for the Palestinian people is Israelis' sole responsibility. Solving the final status issues in the manner described in this vision would create the necessary conditions for investment to start flowing into the region. We estimate that combining this political solution with an economic vision for investment and government reforms that have been laid out will lead to historical economic growth. We estimate that the Palestinian GDP, which has been stagnant, could double in 10 years, create over a million new jobs, and reduce the unemployment rate to below 10%, reduce the poverty rate by 50%. This plan is ready to be implemented in the event that peace can be made in terms that is consistent with the vision. That is known as a carrot, ladies and gentlemen. Dangle that thing and see if... Now, remember, this is not something that the Palestinian Authority or Hamas cares a bit about. What they're hoping is that this gets to the rank and file people in the streets. And they're finally said, yeah, we're sick and tired of this, and it's always blaming someone else, but no one here is taking accountability for it. Now they're hearing externally, and here's the cool thing about it. Information gets to places now where it never used to get to. People will be able to access this. Now again, the overall thing, that covenant that I think we see in Daniel, it will have a lot of this kind of stuff, personally, I believe, because the idea of land for peace is really kind of shot down. And everything that he has to do, the Antichrist that will have to do, is going to have to happen very, very fast. 7 years is nothing, right? Especially to turn the world to your side in 3.5 of those 7 years. Think about that. 3.5 years. To go from a guy seeming to have all the answers to that he becomes the world dictator in 3.5 years. To the point where you won't even be able to operate your lives without him. Imagine that. Can you imagine in our world today, what scenario could you possibly play out where that could happen? It doesn't exist. That is why it will be a supernatural rise, and it will happen so fast. But this is the kind of framework that begins the process and gets people thinking that way. You get it? So, interesting. Now, here's where it gets weird. Because now the United Nations is going to be involved. Since 1946, there have been close to 700 United Nations General Assembly resolutions and over 100 United Nations Security Council resolutions in connection with this conflict. United Nations resolutions are sometimes inconsistent and sometimes time-bound. Inconsistent in the UN. If ever there were two words that went together like peas and carrots, that's it. And I don't even like peas and carrots. I don't know where that came from, by the way. But anyway, furthermore, different parties have offered conflicting interpretations of some of the most significant UN resolutions, including UN Security Council Resolution 242. Does anybody know what 242 was? 242 was what was supposed to give all the land back that was taken in 67. Yeah. So when Israel said, we're sick of you people trying to come after us like that, we're taking your land and we're going to secure ourselves. Gaza, it's ours. Golan Heights, we got that too. The West Bank, yeah, Judea, Samaria is ours as well. Well, the UN thought, you've got to give it back if you want peace. And Israel said, no, it makes us too vulnerable, forget it. And there's been this problem that's gone on ever since. So, indeed, legal scholars who have worked directly on the critical United Nations resolutions have differed in the meaning and their legal effect. Well, why is that? Because the UN is run by a bunch of dictators representing countries that you wouldn't want to live in because they're run by thieves. While we are respectful of the historic role of the United Nations, and I want to snicker, in the peace process, the vision is not a recitation of General Assembly, Security Council, or other international resolutions on the topic, because those resolutions have not and will not ever resolve the conflict. Here again, this is the Trump administration saying, hey, the UN's really important, but they're horrible at their job. That's pretty much what he just said. So we're not even going to try to do the stuff that they've done before. For too long, these resolutions have enabled political leaders to avoid addressing the complexities of the conflict rather than enabling a realistic path to peace. Yeah, because everybody's in it for their own thing. Always has been. So again, what you have are a whole bunch of people who are involved in their own special interest and have no desire whatsoever to try to bring about a solution, because if they did, then they have no reason to exist. Right? So when it comes to this, how many of you know that when it comes to the UN, they are so disproportionately biased against Israel? When you actually hear the facts presented, your jaw drops. How many of you know that? How many of you have actually heard or watched a video presentation that goes through the specifics? How many of you have seen it? I have one that I want to show you. And you're going to, when you see this, if you haven't seen it before, I've shown it before here, but when you actually see the numbers, you go, I'll throw it out this way. You give me a plausible explanation of why it exists as you're going to see it explained here, and then we'll compare notes. Let's bring down the lights and play this. Hey, it's our church. while they're bringing it up, if it goes ahead and plays, I'll just stop. But if you have not had a chance to look through the video archives of what is called...
There are 193 countries in the United Nations today. Of these, one has been singled out as an especially egregious offender of the organization's mandate to preserve and enhance human freedom and tolerance. Can you guess which it is? It has about 7 million citizens, of whom a fifth are Arab.
Let's go ahead and restart it if you would,
The government is vibrantly democratic, its press wide open, and religious freedom...
And we can bring the volume up on it, please.
There are 193 countries in the United Nations today. Of these, one has been singled out as an especially egregious offender of the organization's mandate to preserve and enhance human freedom and tolerance. Can you guess which it is? It has about 7 million citizens, of whom a fifth are Arab. The government is vibrantly democratic, its press wide open, and religious freedom fully respected. Women have equal rights and gays live openly. The answer is Israel. Here are some facts. 38% of all the resolutions of the United Nations Human Rights Council, the UN's top human rights body, that are critical of specific countries have been directed at Israel alone. The Council has a permanent agenda that governs every regular session. This agenda is composed of 10 items, one of which is always reserved for criticizing Israel. Between 2006, when the Council was created, and 2012, it published 48 reports condemning Israel. During that same period, there were 9 reports on Syria's mass killings and torture of its own citizens, 3 on Iran's genocide-threatening regime, and not one on, for example, China, which denies more than 1 billion people elementary freedoms. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. So we are faced with a choice. Either there's something very wrong with Israel that I'm not telling you about, or there's something very wrong with the United Nations that you should know about. Let's look into the history of both. First, Israel. Ever since its establishment, voted for by the United Nations, by the way, in 1948, Israel has had to fight its neighbors solely in order to survive. It has endured innumerable acts of terrorism, the most intense from 2000 to 2005, the so-called Second Intifada, in which children and other innocents were blown up in places like pizza parlors and buses and at weddings. It still suffers from rocket attacks against civilians from the Gaza Strip, which is controlled by a terror group, Hamas, whose stated reason for existence is to destroy Israel. Israel has developed a strong military and a web of security fences and walls to protect itself. Do these security measures cause hardships to people who must deal with this network? Yes, they do. Israel would like nothing better than to tear all these fences and walls down. But bitter experience informs it as to what would happen if it did. Is Israel a perfect country? Of course not. But it is one of the freest and most open societies in the world. That's Israel's history. Here's the UN's. In 1949, when the UN admitted Israel as a member state, the UN had 58 member countries and a clear democratic and pro-Western orientation. Today, the UN has 193 member countries, most of which are not even free. Among its many negative changes, the UN changed the principle of self-determination from a post-World War II, post-Holocaust human rights principle to a tool to wield against the West, especially against Israel. This reached its fullest expression at the notorious Durban Conference held in South Africa in 2001. The Durban Conference was billed as a UN World Conference against racism and intolerance. but it turned into an orgy of anti-Israel and anti-Jew propaganda. Of all the bad actors in the world, the final Durban Declaration found one state guilty of racial discrimination. You guessed it, Israel. The Durban Declaration, however, remains to this day the centerpiece of the UN's allegedly anti-racism agenda. There's only one country in the world whose very legitimacy is questioned. Only one country that is openly threatened with annihilation. That country is Israel. And what has the United Nations done about it? Worse than nothing. It has itself become a global platform for anti-Semitism and the destruction of the Jewish state. I'm Ann Bayevsky, Director of the Turo Human Rights Institute for Prager University.
Now, when we get to Israel on our trips, I'll point out when we get to some of these areas where you'll see these signs that are posted, and they pretty much just say you're entering a Palestinian Authority controlled area. And by Palestinian and Israeli law, no Jews are allowed in. It says that straight up. Oddly enough, in places like that, they're not able to operate, let alone have any rights or even exist. But there are over 1 million non-Jewish people that live in the regular area of Israel. We see them all over the place. So, you get the impression if you watch it that when you get into Israel's part of the territory, everybody's got to be wearing a hat with the little curly things next to their ears, right? Like you see on TV. That is not it. It's a pretty open, pretty secular society, actually. And it's made up of all kinds of different ethnicities that have all the rights and privileges. Here's one of the things that most people don't realize. Even in this last attempt at elections, if I'm not mistaken, there were 13 seats held by non-Jewish, what they would call Palestinians, in the Knesset. That's their government, okay? There are 120 seats in the Knesset, and they held 13 of them, I believe. Maybe more this last time. So they have representation, contrary to what you usually hear. So what will be very interesting, and I'm going to need to do another week. If you guys, would you like to hear any more of this, or are you pretty much done with it? Okay. We'll do a bit more of it next week, because there's still a whole lot more to go through that's, again, very, very interesting in its proposals and why I think you should know about it. One, because there are prophetic parts to this, because, again, it's a tiny little place, but really all of human history kind of comes together in that place at the end of things, when God finally comes back and sets up his kingdom. He sets it up in Jerusalem. Let's just be honest. When you think of all the major wars that are still to take place, happens there. And when he returns to the earth and all that, he goes there, not here. So that's a pretty significant thing. So when you start to see major, major changes taking place there, perk up your ears and pay attention. Your redemption draweth nigh. So interesting stuff. Again, if you geek out on this kind of stuff, and if you know people who do, bring them next week. We'll get into some more of this, because it is intriguing what they're thinking of doing, and pretty interesting. If you want to look through any of what I've got up here, you're welcome to. If you want to try to make sure you get the name of it right, because you want to download it yourself, you can get your own PDF of it, and you can look through it. It makes for, if you like the stuff, it makes for interesting reading. If you don't, and it bugs you, it would be like something that you would do as a way of punishing yourself. It'll make your eyes bleed. So, but it is fascinating to see what's happening in that part of the world. And this is a different approach like I've never seen before. Fascinating stuff. Let's stand, and we'll have a closing word of prayer. Father, we thank you that we can come to you and know that your word speaks of things that happen in the world to come, and in the things in the near future. And when we see things taking shape that are dealing with that part of the world, it is important for us to at least be familiar with what's being spoken of, and that we would be aware. We ask, Lord, that you would give us the ability to see through all of the smoke and the nonsense that we may hear, and that we might understand with clarity the important things. So, Lord, we give you all thanks, and we ask that you would have your way in our lives and our understanding, and help us to be paying attention and praying for that part of the world and for the people there, for their safety, for their well-being. We thank you. We give to you all praise. In Jesus' name, amen.